Hello, this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International, and we're going to carry on with our brief topic discussions in these short videos about covenant. And we've moved on to Exodus chapter 18 now, and we're having a look at the Mosaic Covenant that God made with the children of Israel. And I purposely only want these video clips to be quite short. And obviously there is much more that you could talk about on every single topic that we've covered so far. So very briefly, we've gone through the Exodus. The children of Israel are at the foot of Mount Sinai. And God here is wanting to create with them a grant covenant. By now, if you've been listening to the videos, you will know that there's three types of covenant: a grant covenant, a kinship covenant, and a vassal covenant. We haven't talked very much about the vassal covenants. So we've talked about a few of the other covenants that God made with various people. So we've got the children of Israel to the bottom of Mount Sinai, and God is wanting to cut covenant with them. He's wanting to cut a grant covenant with them. And we can read in chapter 18 of Exodus. He gives them some instructions to prepare themselves for the covenant. And in verse 3, it says, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell all the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all people, for the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And these are the words that I will speak to the people of Israel." And this is the grant covenant that God is wanting to set up with the children of Israel. And we're sort of reminded of those scriptures that I've just read out there. If we look at the book of Peter, and we can see that Peter actually uses very similar words when he's describing about the covenant that we have in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. He says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And so God has given us a grant covenant with the new covenant, and I'm getting ahead of myself a bit there. We will just leave that there. But here in this part of the story that we're looking at now, he's trying to give the Israelites a grant covenant. And unfortunately for them, they actually were very fearful of what was happening. And you have to bear in mind that they'd been in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. So they had only known the Egyptian gods. They had only known the way of being a slave. So to have a God that spoke to you was quite a hard concept for them to grasp hold of, and they were very, very fearful. And we see that when the Lord starts to test them a little bit, and they respond back to him in fear. In the morning of the third day, this is verse 16 of chapter 19, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. So all the people in the camp trembled, and they were so afraid that they said to Moses, we don't want this covenant that this God is asking. We're afraid. We don't want this covenant. You go up and you be our mediator between God and us, and we will do what he tells us to do. And that's what they're saying to Moses here in this covenant. And that this whole chapter here of chapter 19 is confirmed in Deuteronomy chapter 5, and the story is repeated there with a little bit more detail. So God goes up and with Moses, and Moses goes up to God in the mountain, and God honors what the children of Israel wanted, and he gives them, instead of giving them a grant covenant that he wanted to give them, he gives them a kinship covenant. And that is put on the 2 tablets of stone. You remember when we talked about kinship covenant, that's what they did. The rules were written on the tablets of stone. And I'll do a bit more in-depth teaching on that kinship covenant with the children of Israel in another video. But that's where we are with the Mosaic Covenant, and this is, I've called this version 1, or part 1, because they rejected a grant covenant that God was trying to give them, and they then received a kinship covenant. So, see you in the next session.